Good morning and welcome to the Rate and Quality Workgroup. We are going to open our meeting today with opening up the chat feature for public comment for the next 15 minutes. So from now until about 8:45 a.m., we'll have the chat feature open for attendees to provide written public comment. And then we'll begin the meeting as we usually do with some housekeeping and then workgroup discussion. So welcome. I'll turn it over to our interpreters.
We're gonna wait for that one.
Okay.
Buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a la reunión del día de hoy con respecto a la tarifa y calidad. El día de hoy vamos a comenzar aproximadamente a las 8:45 y mientras tanto vamos a esperar para que todos puedan unirse con nosotros. Muchísimas gracias.
Good morning. Once again, if you've just joined us, we've opened up the chat feature for public comment at the start of this meeting until about 8:45 a.m. Thank you.
欢迎 Zoom 聊天时间为上午8点半到8点45，公共中提供意见，我们将于上午8点45开始开会。
If you've just joined us, we're in the final minutes of public comment via chat. The chat feature is open for all to use to provide written comment at this time. In about 2 minutes, we'll be moving on to our housekeeping and work group discussion. Thank you.
Buenos días, si se acaban de unir, nosotros todavía estamos en el periodo de hacer comentarios en el chat, está abierto por unos minutos más, así que después de 2 minutos más o menos vamos a comenzar la conversación con el grupo de trabajo.
欢迎，我们Zoom的聊天时间是上午8点30到8点45，为公众提供意见。我差不多还有1-2分钟时间，那之后呢，我们就开始我们跟工作组的讨论了。谢谢。
Okay, seeing that it's 8:45 a.m., we are going to go ahead and close the chat feature at this time. We'll have public comment at the end of this meeting, and we'll move on to our housekeeping slides. Before we begin our workgroup discussion, I'd like to review a few Zoom features with all of you. We will enable these features after providing this instruction. In a few moments, we'll be offering the closed captioning feature in Zoom. To access this feature, you'll need to locate the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then
Recording in progress.
Show subtitle. This will allow you to view closed captions in English throughout the meeting. In a moment, we'll also offer language interpretation services. So let me turn things over to our interpreters to describe how you can listen to this meeting in English, Spanish, and Mandarin.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. Diana Orozco and I, Giovanna Wormsbecker, will be your Spanish interpreters. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous bidirectional interpretation from English to Spanish and Mandarin. Please note that the translation will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly, and to prevent technical glitches or interference occurring between the 3 language channels when one is not selected. If you're on a laptop, please locate the icon shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen, click on Language Interpretation, and then select English. If you're on an iPad or your phone or a similar device, then locate the 3-dot menu on the right corner of your screen, click on Language Interpretation, and then select English. When you speak, please do so at a moderate pace because the interpreter is going to be simultaneously interpreting everything you say. Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a esta reunión. Diana Orozco y yo, Giovanna Wormsbecker, seremos sus intérpretes en español. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional en inglés y en español y mandarín. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que se haya leído todas las instrucciones en inglés y en español y mandarín. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma de preferencia para facilitar escuchar a los presentadores y participantes con claridad, evitando que se produzcan fallas técnicas o interferencias entre los 3 canales lingüísticos cuando no se ha seleccionado uno de estos. Si está usando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Español. Si está utilizando un iPad o teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha. Haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas y elija Español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde de hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente al otro idioma. Now I will turn things over to our Mandarin interpreter. Thank you.
各位早上好，欢迎参加本次的会议。我的名字是亚楠，今天和 Michael 一起提供普通话的翻译。 为了提供语言的服务，我们今天的会议会有双向同声传译的服务，将英语翻译为西班牙语和普通话。请注意，在我们读完所有英文、西班牙文和中文的说明之后，翻译频道的地球图案才会出现。为了避免为了选择语言频道而导致技术性的故障或干扰，我们要求今天参加本次会议的每一个人都必须要从3种语言当中选择您想听的语言，才能够清楚地听到发言者还有与会者，如果他们需要发言或问问题时的声音。如果您使用的是台式或笔记本电脑，等一下在屏幕顶下您会看到一个地球形状的图标，点击图标之后它会出现一个选项，您可以选择各个语言的频道，包括英语或者是普通话，那就是 Chinese Mandarin。如果您使用的是 iPad 或手机或类似的移动设备，等一下会在屏幕的右上角会看到3点图标，点击之后呢，出现语言频道的选项，您就可以选英语或者是普通话 Chinese Mandarin。如果您是用英语听取今天的会议，也请您一定要选择英语的频道。如果今天有机会轮到您发言的时候，请您放慢速度，让我们口译员能够同步翻译您所说的所有内容。谢谢。Thank you.
We will now enable live transcription and language interpretation. Please select your preferred language channel at this time. And I'll now turn things over to Janelle Kubinik. Janelle?
Thanks, Karen, for getting us kicked off. And it's like unbelievable that, a process we started in January with in some ways, I'll say a blank stack of papers has gotten filled into be just such an amazing report. And it's really a testament to the work of this group, the contributions from the public. And I just would say the persistence and energy and passion that you've all brought to this. So it is just, I think we never quite anticipated what it would mean to get to this point. And I think, this is going to be for us both informative and as well as celebratory. And so what we're going to do for today's meeting is really provide some highlights and invite people to provide their comments and through your voice, share what this work group has created together. And before I do that, what I'd like to do, we started this process with our state leaders really helping us launch off. And I would like to turn this over to leaders from the California Department of Social Services and California Department of Education to provide some opening comments. So I'll start with Lupe and then Stephen Profiter, if we'll turn it to you. So Lupe, are you with us?
I am. Good morning,
perfect.
Everyone. And happy to get started. So good morning, everyone. I'm Lupe Hyman Milam, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Child Care and Development Division. And so excited to be with you all. Like Janelle had shared, we had started this in January, and I also want to just share that although we thought it was such a daunting task at that time to be able to beat this deadline, we realized that we had so much great work to build on from the master plan of early learning, as well as the Blue Ribbon Commission work, and many of you were part of both those efforts as well as many others. And so don't want to not give those credits out there because I think that's important. I also want to share my greatest gratitude to everyone involved from the public. I know that these hours during the day sometimes are very difficult when you are operating, for instance, a licensed family child care home provider, or you're operating a center. And I think I heard from the public a lot of times that they have their earpiece on one just to listen in to make sure that they are able to keep track of this important work. And so expressing my gratitude for that engagement and giving us that gift of time. Our early learning and care providers, community experts, and of course the community all along, and most importantly, our work group members. right? Very critical for this work, and our sister agencies, California First 5, as well as our CDE and many others. I'm going to take a brief moment to just do some shout outs here in regards to this. Please know that this is not an exclusive list. There's many more that would probably take up so much of this meeting that I definitely would have someone eventually mute me. So want to also share that these are a few of the many that I want to just recognize. Start with the work group members. We are indebted to you and we express our gratitude. You spent countless hours architecting details of this plan, your plan. Most importantly, we want you to own this. We appreciate your voices, your respectful disagreements. When we need to push, we needed to. And that was important for you to feel safe to do that within each other and within the public to make sure all voices were represented in this report. So thank you for all that. California CDE partners, always thank you for your dedication and support during these many months to co-create agendas, and especially to reflect on discussions and to bring in that institutional knowledge to this work also. I want to thank our CDSS, not only several divisions across the CDSS department, our Director Kim Johnson, of course, and Chief Deputy Jen Troya, and so many others, including the Child Care and Development team who work behind the scenes with this critical work that you have forward today. Wested and Glenn Price for your critical role in compiling all this together. We know it was an enormous lift with a very tight deadline. And Wested, of course, I don't want to miss your facilitation to ensure that every work member was heard, and just importantly, that the public was, in this virtual world that we live now, had a voice to be able to shape also the work that we have ahead of us and this report itself. I want to take a moment to also thank Nancy Stroll. She was so instrumental in this work. Many of you may not know her, but she also led some of the work with the Blue Ribbon Commission and bringing that into this place for countless hours, and really combing through everything to make sure that everything was captured in every meeting is just a big thank you to you. I also want to thank Carla Flores Howe. This was for leading this effort. I know it was such a huge ask to be able to lead this effort, complete it on time, and all the asks that came with that. You ensured that equity was in the forefront of every interaction, that the work group members lifted up and ensured that the community and family voices were centered around this work. And so thank you for that. The work of this group to this day and the continuing work that will result from the valuable recommendations in this report is yet another historic step for the current and future of our children and families of California, and for early learnings and care professionals at all levels. This work is another step in creating an equitable, high-quality mixed delivery system from a whole child, whole family lens. As many of you know, the Department of Social Services, in collaboration with Department of Education, convened the Rate and Quality Work Group to establish under AB 131. The purpose of this work group was to assess the methodology for establishing reimbursement rates and the existing quality standards for the child care and development and preschool programs, and to make related recommendations. The Work and Quality Work Group has identified specific equity considerations and recommendations, which we go into more details today, including the need to elevate the voices of early educators and families, and the need to take a targeted universalism approach to implement changes to California's reimbursement as a rate structure and program and quality system. It is also important to highlight and recognize that this is the first step, achieving a comprehensive reimbursement rate and quality reform that will require changes to our systemic and policies, our system and policies. In addition to recommendations for this alternate methodology, this group discussed quality standards, and what you all made already clear is that we must assess our quality standards with an equity lens. You all made the recommendations of a two-phase approach to this assessment, In phase one, we hear the importance of recognizing the quality that exists in many of the programs for early care and educator run. In phase two, you all share that it is important to assess our current system with strong equity focus and will not result in the recreation of a quality improvement system that perpetuates inequalities and is not accessible to all providers and workforce. We hear you all sharing the importance of reimagining the quality systems. We're committed in continuing to explore this with you for so much months to come. So as we move to the rest of the agenda, again, thank you to all involved in this work over these past months, as well as historically, many of you that have been supporting this for many years. With my closing statement, I want to turn it over now to Steve Profiter, Director of CDE.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lupe, and always a hard act to follow. I'll say that. Just you've captured so much wonderfully, Lupe. So good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to join you this morning on behalf of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and the California Department of Education. I'm Stephen Profiter, as Lupe mentioned, I'm the Director of the Early Education Division at CDE. I'll start with some appreciation for the robust public engagement and the fact that we've been able to incorporate as many people as we have without having to travel to Sacramento. I think that's a marvel in and of itself to be able to have this broad engagement, represent the voices of all in early education and early learning and care. I want to extend a big thank you to the workgroup members for your input on this report and your commitment to serving the diverse children, families, and programs of California. I'd also like to echo the appreciation for the public input from all. We see the chat often fill up in these meetings, and your passion comes through. And that passion really kind of provides the mandate that we have to continuously improve our work on rates and quality in early education and care. It has been such an honor to work with you to kind of watch these work group sessions kind of work in the background over the last 8 months. And as we've discussed, how best to support equity, capacity across the system, and of course, rates. A key part of capacity, of course. As we think about the work in this space, there have been some really important things that have come up through our work. The foremost being that the current model of setting rates does not set our system up for success and is inequitable. Through all of this, our thread will continue to be how we can use what we know from research on the elements of quality in early learning and care programs that best support child development and positive child outcomes and lead to our ultimate goal, thriving children who are ready to enter school and succeed in school and life. It is clear from your testimonies and passion that this is the heart of the matter for us all. Equity demands that we build a system that creates the opportunities for every child to thrive. One key point for this is making sure that quality is a part of the equity conversation. We appreciate this important conversation here, and we look forward to diving deeper in the next or upcoming phases. As the Rate and Quality Workgroup report highlights, we must remain dedicated to increasing rates so that programs are able to provide quality learning and care opportunities that align with the research on what promotes child outcomes and have equity and cultural and linguistic affirmation at their core. This means providing rates that support programs to hire, retain, and support culturally and linguistically diverse educators who are able to implement effective curricula with fidelity and individualize learning activities to meet children's developmental needs. Our educators should be supported to participate in the preparation and professional learning opportunities that equip them with the knowledge and skills they need to support our youngest learners. And teachers and caregivers who want to advance their qualifications should be able to do so. They should be supported to do so through varied and accessible pathways and rewarded through a system that ensures that, reaching a higher level of either both education or qualifications provides better commensurate compensation We look forward to the evolution of the cost model provided by P5 Fiscal Strategies in collaboration with programs all around California. And this really further supports the need for reform, this cost model and the work around it, and a need for increased rates across the entire system to address these important needs. So just as I close here and I hand back, just again, thank you everybody. This has been a lot of work in a kind of short band, and it's been a big lift. So I really want to acknowledge all of the work all around on this, and just having this opportunity to work alongside you all on this journey, and knowing that the journey's not over, and that we look forward to the next steps of this process, including having more conversations to focus on the quality aspect to ensure children are receiving high quality learning experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Lupe and Stephen, for those opening comments. I think the appreciations are something that I will carry forward as we go through this day. It's been a hardworking group, and so let's. What I'd like to do is, you've heard me do this multiple times, so just for consistency's sake, let me do it again. And that is to sort of, start our journey with where this really started, which was the direction provided in AB 131. And this, I think it's appropriate that we had both of our State Department of Social Service and State Department of Education leaders here to provide comment, as they are really the responsible party for convening this work group. And then being a partner in the process, but it truly is now then the work group that's taken this over and putting together what is in response to this statutory charge. And that is to assess the methodology for establishing a reimbursement rate and the existing quality standards for child care and development in preschool programs. This assessment must be informed by evidence-based elements that best support child development and positive child outcomes. And so you'll hear in a moment just reminders about all of the expertise and research that has been engaged with over the last several months to get to the point where we have recommendations that are now being turned over or will be turned over to the Joint Labor Management Committee, for which we have an overlap of membership, to the Department of Finance and the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. So the due date is the 15th, which is Monday. Today's meeting gets us to be able to say, we've done all that is here and done it on time. And so that's been quite a feat. I know throughout this process, we've raised questions about time is an issue. And so you allowed us to add in more meetings. You allowed us to push hard. You allowed us to, make comments short and brief, and you got really good at making them snappy. And so I just think that throughout this process, really, it demonstrated everyone's ability to be good listeners, to be highly engaged, to be sharing and ultimately co-creating ideas. And so this report, I think, is really about those shared ideas that are built from multiple perspectives. And I think the legislation by design said we have to have representation across a lot of groups, but you made reality the actual representation of ideas. And I think demonstrated yet again the importance and the need for diverse thought in putting together challenging ideas. And so, this is a group that hasn't always agreed, but I think has been willing to learn with each other and to think together and on what mattered, really come together in a way to blend ideas. And I think the other part of this is we've relied on critical thought partners. We've relied on outside experts and resources throughout. And one of them that has been along this journey every step of the way has been P5 Fiscal Strategies. And last meeting, there were some comments raised about the connections between the work that P5 has done with the survey and cost analysis and the body of work done by the work group. And I think before we get into the work group's report, it would be helpful to have P5 provide some comments about what their report is doing and what's happening with that and how it connects and relates. So Simon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Janelle. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you again. And As Janelle said, we have a separate independent report that we are publishing and will be live as of Monday. It is just going through final design and outlay right now. So that will be live on Monday and you'll be able to access that. But we're going to just give you a quick overview of what's in that and then talk about sort of how that connects to the next step. So I will pass it over to Gina to walk us through that.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you this morning. So we are going to do three quick things. We're just going to do sort of a reminder of what we were working with you all on as prenatal to 5 fiscal strategies. We're going to just quickly talk about the bones of what's in the report that will be available on Monday. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of a cost model in relationship to rate setting. So those are the sort of core concepts we're going to go over. So pretty much everything that we're going to talk about right now is going to be things that you've seen before, but coming together in this at this point where you now have a cost model that answers these cost questions around cost of care, and you are at the stage of moving into the concept of rate setting. So we're kind of refining these concepts we've spoken about, especially in the early spring months, bringing them more to the forefront now that there's a cost model answering those cost questions for you as a state. So I'm going to quick and share my screen and walk you through a couple slides on that. So as I said, some of it's going to be things you've seen before. You've probably seen this slide no less than a dozen times, where we highlight who we are and what our work is. Our national work as a nonprofit is based in this idea of moving states towards not just having answers to questions on cost, but then moving to the policy change that takes those answers and really makes the sorts of systems and policy change that you need to change the context. And so really echoes a lot of what both Lupe and Steve kind of brought to the forefront of where California is headed. For our work in California and what is often referred to as the study that Prenatal to 5 Fiscal Strategies was doing, we were building a cost model. As part of that building of a cost model involved a tremendous amount of engagement with providers, with communities, and with you as the work group, as well as the JLMC rate setting group around the idea of what are the base variables that should be in that cost model? How does the cost model need to function to reflect the context of California communities? All of the work was supported by private foundations, and again, is designed to be the sort of set of answers that then these bodies can go and use for the next steps of this work. So as a bit of a reminder, a bit of a throwback, you may remember the timeline from the very beginning, and many work group members as well as public were sort of like, how in the world would you possibly do all of this in a state the size of California? And we did it because of partnership with you helping open the doors to get the survey out into the communities, open doors to get focus groups and input sessions on the calendar so that providers and communities had the opportunity to understand the concept of a cost model and the process of building it and inform us in making those good decisions around it. And so we have spent much of our work, obviously, from May until now on that model development and then running scenarios in the model. We really refer to that concept of running scenarios, but to boil it down to where we were in partnership together was all those discussions around variables. What is base quality for a Title 22 program? What are the variables of base quality for a Title 5 program? Those are the pieces that then informed us to be able to build the cost model and run scenarios reflective of those two key pieces. And as you remember, one of the core concepts for this was that we were looking at having a single rate setting approach. And so using a cost-based tool, you were using a singular approach to understanding the cost of childcare. And while the answers may differ based on the type of setting you're in or what regulations that setting meets, you're using the same approach by having a cost model that cuts across all those different variables. One of the other key pieces of this is that sort of distinction that the cost model development and the gathering of all of the data and information on what those assumptions should be in the cost model and then running scenarios is discrete from the rate setting process. In all states and communities we work in, we are building the tools that then support the conversations and, again, having answers to questions around those concepts of, now, where do we go with this to set our rates? And what is our individual context as a state or community that we have to be aware of as we go about that rate setting? So one of the major products that leads us to is a cost estimation model that does all of these things. It estimates the cost of providing care at a variety of different levels, and whether those are levels of quality or whether it's a Title 22 program or a Title 5 program. The model that was developed for California has all of those elements to it. It has and does analyze the impact of program size, whether a program serves children from birth to school age or only serves infants and toddlers. All of those variables are how the cost model functions. It then allows us to understand that idea of the impact of multiple funding sources, because oftentimes funding sources come with more regulations. So the model allows for understanding that as well, and not just understanding the impact of the additional revenue, but the additional cost that may come with a revenue source. And then, of course, what the gap may be, the difference between available revenue and the actual cost of the services with the variables that are in place. So again, this is nothing new. These are sort of the foundation of what we do when we're building a cost model for a state. These are also elements that align with the federally approved alternative methodology for rate setting underneath your Child Care and Development Fund funding for subsidizing childcare. Currently, states primarily use the market rate to set those rates, but they're allowed to use an alternative methodology using a cost process. Some of the federal regulations around that process outline some of these exact concepts, and we bake those into building a cost model, whether we're building a cost model under the header of alternative methodology for a state, which we've done with all the states that are currently using alternative methodology, or if we're building a cost model for a state or community that are using it for other aspects of informing their childcare system. We've included all of the things that help you to meet those federal regulations in the process. And of course, we spent a lot of time talking about that difference between price and cost. And that's that sort of big pivot in thinking about moving to a single approach to rate setting. That single approach is using cost to inform rate setting as opposed to using price, which is what the market rate is gathering, is information about price or what families can actually pay for childcare, not what the service actually costs to be delivered. So all of this is coming together in what will be a publicly available report from Prenatal 5 Fiscal Strategies. And so just to give you a quick snapshot of what's in the report, of course, there's a bit of an introduction and background. We've spoken a lot about the broken childcare market, the idea of price that I just mentioned, the idea of moving to cost-based. We include some of that foundation in the report. It helps all stakeholders to really have that right at their fingertips to think about it in relationship to the California context. So there's some of those pieces are in the report for the California cost estimation model. We then go into a little bit more on methodology. So all of those stakeholder interviews, all of the survey data, all of that process that we've been spending a tremendous amount of time talking to you about and engaging with your communities around, we really break that out in methodology so that it demonstrates how all the different sources of information, whether it's data like what wage structure should we use or what assumptions should be in the model, that's part of that methodology of how the model was built and how California was involved in that process and how all the different constituents in the childcare system were involved in that process. And then we move into talking a little bit about how the model actually works so that there's that basis of understanding it before we then talk about model results. The model results that are included in the Prenatal 5 Fiscal Strategies report are the exact results that were shared with the Rate and Quality Workgroup at the July 12th meeting, as well as those results were shared with the JLMC later in the month of July. So there's not any new results being presented in our report because we are following the scenarios that were the recommendation of the workgroup or the request of the workgroup was to use the MIT living wage calculator and have living wage be the salary assumption. And then we also have obviously the selection of Title 22 base quality or Title 5 base quality. So those variables that we spoke about in June, they are all the charts that we went through in detail over the course of our July meetings. But the final meeting on July 12th was the one where we were presenting only MIT living wage scenarios. And that's what's included in our report. It does include comparison to current payment rates, so you can see that gap. So you can think about at cost of care or true cost of care under MIT living wage, how does that compare to our available payment rates? And then there's a few different appendices in there that highlight the different source data and pieces of information that all go into it. So just give you a preview. We've had the opportunity to meet with several work group members over the last couple of days, just answering any questions about the report and hearing additional feedback. And we appreciate your time on that. And we know that everyone is sort of anxiously anticipating being able to see the report. You can imagine that the amount of tables and charts that go into a report like this, it takes a lot of design time. And it's really important that it's right. The numbers aren't wrong and that something's not wrong on more than one chart. And so we spend a lot of time in design and copy editing and review of design. So it will be available to see on Monday. And so I want to tie this now to the idea of alternative methodology. Because as I mentioned earlier, one of the major things that we often do is we build cost models for states in particular when they have already said, we want to pursue alternative methodology under our federal funding to set our subsidized childcare rates. And under that alternative methodology, they determine they want to use a cost model approach. And so this too, like all the rest of the slides today, there's not anything new here, but sort of thinking about it from this particular vantage point of where you are right now as a state. These are the elements of alternative methodology that are required by the federal regulations. They're very similar to the market rate in the sense that there has to be stakeholder engagement, there has to be data collection, there's a tool. In the case of alternative methodology, it's a cost model, and then the state has to move to that process, the state or tribe has to move to that process then of setting their rates based on those earlier steps in the process. And so I bring this up at this point because we've been working on building a cost model for the California context, which really does all three of those top things: the engagement, the cost study and data collection and assumptions and gathering of how should your model function, and then the actual building of the model. And then, as we've talked about a lot, it's a dynamic tool that you ask questions of, and it gives you answers based on the questions that you ask. You then use that information to inform your rate setting process. So you have a lot of the work done to support you in that movement towards alternative methodology. There's a few things that are why you're not under alternative methodology right now. Some of it's timing. You have to do it within a certain amount of time of when your next federal plan is due for your childcare dollars. But there's also the element of making sure that as you're doing alternative methodology, you're kind of checking each box that the feds hold you to. But again, the way the process is built and the tool that has been built in partnership with you all in the last few months all aligns with those federal regulations because of our experience in building cost models, and because we know so many states are moving there. They might not be there yet, but they're looking to be there within the next couple of years. So if they're building a cost model now, they want it to meet the regulations of alternative methodology, so it's turnkey when they want to move to alternative methodology. But one of the key things that's different than building a cost model to just answer questions or to help with local investment of dollars is that under alternative methodology, you follow certain regulations related to rate setting that are part of things that you've been doing for years. As you've been receiving Child Care and Development Fund dollars for years and years as a state, you've always done a rate setting process. And that's sort of the pivot of where you're at now. And so I want to take us and pivot to that concept and talk a little bit more about rate setting and some of the contextual ideas that come into rate setting. This particular element of the steps in rate setting is pretty much taken exactly, and you see in the italicized text, is really coming exactly from guidance on in the federal regulations to lead agencies. And that, in the case of state of California, the lead agency is DSS. And obviously they use the term lead agency because in tribes or territories, the entity that holds it is not necessarily a state organization. And one of the things that is required of that lead agency is similar to how you would use a market rate. You have to show how the process that you used under alternative methodology reflects all these different variations of provider type, age of children, where the children are in the state, and different variables of quality or program implementation. So it should sound familiar. It's all those things that we talked about that are baked into your model. And then the agency is tasked with describing how they're going to go about using that tool and set of answers to inform their rate setting. So that's sort of the foundation of rate setting, comes from the answers to those cost model questions, but then the state describes, or the lead agency describes, how they're going to use that. And what the feds sort of offer guidance around is the idea of the factors that you consider. So what the cost of care information that you get is, whether it varies across the state, how do you ensure that it is still maximizing parental choice. That's a really critical piece of it. How do you ensure that decisions you make around the rates that you set are ensuring equal access, that children or families accessing the subsidy have equal access to types of care that someone who is purchasing their care with their own dollars? All of those variables have to come into play. Those are some of the big considerations that you have to speak to the feds about during your rate setting process. What we also like to then talk about are some of the other pretty significant contextual factors that exist in states that, as we move from a market that was based on price and what families could pay, which we know is not reflective of what the cost of care is, to moving to using cost of care to inform rates. As we've talked about in many instances, there are a fair amount of sort of inequities within our system currently, and informing your rate setting this can be a significant piece of it, is to think about how do we use cost of care information that we now have in front of us to help us address those inequities that have oftentimes been pretty historic. And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So obviously, one of the core things is that setting rates based on cost of quality and actual expenses of a program versus what a family may be able to pay is going to then support programs to ensure they're compensated for the cost of their services. It's going to help you to account for things like serving infants and toddlers costs more than serving preschoolers typically. So how do we make sure rates reflect that, right? So some of those and other special circumstances like children with special needs or families, dual language or multi-language families, and that it can also start to address one of those sort of biggest foundational issues that we have with the broken market is that providers in lower income areas are already receiving much lower rates, again, not related to their costs. So how do we really go about addressing that equitable access issue so that we are not continuing to pay forward the idea that if a family's in a lower income community, their voucher is worth less, and therefore providers may not find it as valuable to accept the voucher. And so how do we go about addressing those things? And so some of how this plays out in states, and this is sort of from the 3 or 4 places that have most actively worked on it underneath alternative methodology and have been doing it for several years, is addressing kind of at their foremost those inequities. And so they find in analyzing, when they go into rate setting and they analyze their cost information, that they see some of the biggest gaps are in the care, the subsidy payments that are made for infant toddler care, the subsidy payments that are made for family child care. When they kind of compare across cost of care to revenue, some ages are doing a little better. Preschool age children and school age children, most places find the cost of care and the revenue available to those programs for those ages of children are a little closer. The gap is much bigger for infants, toddlers, and then in family childcare settings. So a lot of times what states will do is say, well, while we are going to go about increasing rates for everyone, it doesn't mean that we are going to increase rates at the same percentage for everyone, that we may increase rates for infants and toddlers at a greater amount than we do for preschool age children because of the fact that the information and our context is telling us that that is where the greater inequity is. And so we need to go about addressing that inequity. Places that have done this over the course of more than one cycle then do something different the next round. Once they've sort of started to be able to chip at those inequities, then 3 years later, when that inequity is not as large anymore, then they're able to make increases in rates that's more even across the board because that's reflective of what the cost information is showing them. I was for really understanding those, okay, how do we make sure that if we have specialized need populations, that the rates that we are paying to incentivize providers to serve those children are reflective of how much more that care costs. So that's another contextual factor that places have to take into consideration. And then another huge piece of rate setting is you have to think about the whole, right? The cost per child information that a cost model gives you is truly at that level. This is how much it costs to serve an infant for a year in this sort of program. But we have to think about it as a whole system. And so many times what states are faced with is saying, well, what are our current available revenues, or what is the ask that we're making for the available revenues to cover the rates, and what can we achieve with what we have available to us, or the ask that we're going to make to try and increase our revenues. So there has to be a balancing of it. And oftentimes states will find that they have a goal, but maybe their goal is a 5 or 6 year mark of where they want to get providers to as a percentage of the cost of care. And what happens in year 1, year 2, year 3 are those incremental steps to achieving that goal. So you have to really think about the inequities that are very much at that child and program level, but then states, as part of that rate setting context, have to balance it against their reality of the available revenues and what they can achieve in those 1 year increments typically, but it doesn't mean they don't hold a more multi-year goal for their investments and what they want to see for their early care and ed system. So that's in a nutshell, the idea of moving from having answers to cost questions to rate setting and how contextual it is related to individual states. I want to sort of wrap that up and present it to you, and I'm going to turn it back to Janelle.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Simon and Katie, for all that work. I think it's, this has been one that while we have your conversations has helped this group come up with like, how do we start thinking about base rate? How do we start thinking about those components? And I think what you've given us is a point of reference that as we take the work group recommendations to move forward with alternative methodology, we now have a point of reference for us to do the next stage of survey and analysis that solidifies what would be the proposal to the federal government on this. So thank you very much for that. And what I'd like to do is go back to sharing my screen here for a second, and I'll go back to these slides. And so what we're going to do for the next 2 hours of the meeting is I'm going to just be moderating, having our workgroup members share with each other and the public what is in the report. We've put the link to the report into the chat so you can access the workgroup's report. You can see a link's been added to where the P5 fiscal strategies report will be on Monday. So we invite everyone to certainly take a look at that when it is available. Where we want to start today, and we're going to walk through this in the order in which information is appearing in the print report, but we're not going to do a read aloud. We're going to do is really highlights and giving some of that context that we can, having spent many months on this, but really what do we want people to take away from this report? And so, as you'll recall, early on, people said, okay, what's this all about? Help us see what this is. And we iterated with this group what the vision and values meant. So I think I'd like to turn this over to Carla and Virginia to walk us through what are the pieces here that were lifted up as core values and incorporating the work that has framed the work group's approach and recommendations. So,
perfect.
Carla.
Thank you so much, Janelle. So I want to share that this work group had the really thoughtful foresight of developing a framework. We knew our discussions would get pretty complicated. There would be varying history that we would try to settle on. And as we made recommendations, we thought it would be really helpful to take AB 131, make sure that all the information laid out in the section that developed the work group was part of the framework. So the state role, and Virginia and myself represented the state in the work group, was really to focus on the statutory charge. So early on, we discussed setting the vision, values, and guiding principles. This developed our framework. And the work group defined a set of core values and guiding principles that were really aligned to the statutory charge. As we debated recommendations, these values and guiding principles were very informative for decision making. The values helped us provided direction and purpose. They were our guiding compass, and the guiding principles were important because they helped in decision making. And basically, we landed on 5 critical values. First and foremost, and just really, really important to the work group was equity. We thought it was really important to recognize historical racism and the importance of recognizing that to see what recommendations can begin to right some of those wrongs. And most importantly, the work group insisted on the importance of diverse voices. So it was this work group that really pushed for family parent voices, and for additional conversations with the early care educators, not only on the work group, but also the public comment. And actually that brings us to the second really critical value that this work group emphasized. Back in February, we brought a chart to the work group that lifted up some of the values, and early educators were not in that discussion. Thank you for the visual. The early educators were not initially included and are actually not in the statute in the same way that some of the other values are called out. And this work group took a very strong position on the value of uplifting educator outcomes. And the work group has been really clear that any conversation on rate reform must include workforce outcomes as well. So you see it included in the values and the guiding principles. And lastly, naming accessibility. This is also within the statute. The work group discussed the statutory charge, and our discussion really focused on strengthening our mixed delivery system to ensure all families have access to diverse program settings to meet their needs. So just calling out 3 of the critical values, I'll turn it to Virginia to close on the 2 other critical values that led our discussions. And the blue chart would be most helpful. That's the framework. Virginia, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carla. So 2 of the other values, which which you saw briefly on the blue chart, and then on the higher level slide, are really that focus on quality and children and families. That was a key part of the statutory charge to this work group. And so as we looked as a work group at quality, we talked a lot about making sure that quality is rooted in family and child outcomes, really thinking about the experiences of the child and the needs of the whole child and whole family. So things like social emotional development and early mental health, nurturing relationships, trauma-informed lens, children receiving affirmations for their whole character, exposure to learning opportunities that help them meet their potential, and then bringing in family voice both into the learning environment and then valuing and incorporating those needs and values into what's provided. We talked a lot about quality as part of this, and the work group is recommending a 2-phased approach on quality, where phase 1 really looks at implementing a base rate that supports programs and providers to meet all current program quality standards, and acknowledges also how important warm and loving interactions and cultural and linguistic responsiveness and inclusion that's already present in the system. Then the work group is recommending a phase 2 approach, where we look deeper at California's quality system, recognizing what we already have and how we can provide better support to that system, knowing that there has been a lot of issues historically, especially around racial bias and the legacy of slavery. Then there's also pieces on doing more work. Oh, sorry, I already said that. Then on children and families, you can see here, the guiding principles that really led this work group's work. Some of which really you can't talk about quality without talking about children and families. So what you'll see on this chart is that a lot of things bleed over. We always say equity is quality and quality is equity. So, but we wanting to, tease out some of the nuance here. So that's why you're seeing some overlap. So children and families, we want to make sure that children have access to those nurturing, educational, culturally, linguistically, developmentally appropriate care, supporting their school readiness, as well as their long-term positive learning and development outcomes. And then making sure, and this is a cornerstone of the equity piece of this report, that we have robust family engagement in all decisions and support for families since they have the greatest impact on their children. So pieces around how equity is both an outcome and a process that we need to be building in. I'll hand it back to you, Janelle. We could talk all day. Carla and I could talk all day. So really want to just say thank you to everyone. We've put a long hours into these meetings. And I think when we look at these principles, it's so clear that we all want the best for California's children. And we're so honored to get to work with all of you as part of that.
Thanks, Virginia. Thanks, Carla. And you know, I think before we actually get into the details, it's really good to remind ourselves that this work is built on work that has come before. It is built based on hearing expertise so that we can inform what is research-based and really thinking about a solid foundation. So I wonder, Jackie, if you would mind giving us sort of that recap of what brought us to this point and who did we hear from along the way to further our understanding?
Yeah, thank you, Janelle. And I just want to thank my colleagues, thank the field. And I was taking notes and I'm getting so emotional. Like, am I never going to see you all again in this space? Because I just want to acknowledge how hard this conversation has been when we root everything in a history of slavery. Right, we honor and we lift it up, and these are hard and courageous conversations that we own together. And how proud I am of this work group to take it on and champion it. Right, I need to it is uncomfortable, and some of you saw us and kind of wrangling and rumbling with what is equity. Right, equity as a means to what I wholly feel is justice. Right, using the I'm going to steal this from Cornel West, who is rooted in Sacramento, right, is that we know that justice is what love looks like in public. And that is what we all hear. Every single voice I heard on the work group, every single voice written in the comments, every single voice on the calls, we are seeking justice for our children, our families, our communities, our providers, and ourselves. Right. I just want to be, as we kind of use this word equity over and over and over again, I am just so grateful for the rumbling, for the energy that you saw, because it exhibits to me the passion and the dedication of the conversations that we are centering in children and families. And that is just such a powerful thing to be part of. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. Just lifting up this comment and centering in the injustices that have happened in Black, Indigenous, and Latina, communities, and primarily an industry that is led by women of color, supporting the healthy development of our children. Right, I just want to kind of with gratitude. Thank West Ed for facilitating such a wonderful conversation, an important one and a righteous one, especially in this moment in time in our history. So thank you. And just about that history, this is 2 decades in the making, y'all. Like 2 decades. That's a generation of children and families. Like when you go back, these seem like words on paper, but some of us have grown up in this conversation, right? So it began in 2003 when Senator Burton, supported by unions and other stakeholders, was a first effort to decide, hey, this kind of doesn't make sense, right? What is this single rate reimbursement system? Let's try to get together. In 2003. In 2000, a decade went by and a couple more years. And in 2018, First Five convened a work group with a strong process and made some recommendations, which were central to the consideration of this work group today. In 2019, we had the Blue Ribbon Commission endorsed by the white paper recommendations, and broader recommendations were considered by this group. In 2020, the master plan built on the white paper made recommendations that were also central to our considerations. And in 2021, there was a budget action that established us, right, to kind of make these recommendations that we will turn over on Monday. It was two decades in the making, but there is an urgency of now that I want to acknowledge, right? 2003, 2018, here we are in 2022. It is powerful, and we are part of this movement. I'm just so grateful. With that, with our just intentionality with our conversations, we brought experts to inform us along the way. We've heard from parent and family perspectives, again, parent voices, Abriendo Puertas, advancement project others, right? In equity, we learned from Child Trends, the Black Californians United for Early Care and Education. We, with cost modeling, we heard from prenatal to 5 fiscal strategies, as we heard from this morning. The data, the Resource and Referral Network and the RAND Corporation had so much information and data for us to consider. And then when we kind of dug into this concept of targeted universal, to be really intentional about equity, to be strategic, to lift up the voices and the issues that are, again, created on a system that is just historically racist, right? We learned from the Institute of Othering and Belonging from the University of California, Berkeley, and that just kind of grounded us in everything that we did. And so I know that it's not comprehensive, but most importantly to me is the voices of the families, communities, the early care and education providers who informed us along the way. So that's a little bit about our journey and our history and just my gratitude for the privilege and honor of serving on this work group with you. Janelle, back to you.
Thanks,
I don't know
Jackie.
if I missed another part of history, but just wanted to kind of.
We could spend all day on the history too. So I think that, as you said, I liked how you said many of us have grown up with this issue. So it's good to see it finally graduating and everyone here being part of that. So I just want to move us then now to the recommendations. Like what have we really decided here? What are we putting forward? And what does it mean next? And so I want to just sort of give you a sense of process for those. I mean, I think we've all lived this, but my reflection of process has been, it's been highly iterative, and it has been informed by each step of the way by new ideas that we've had to think about. And I look at this process as it's been very collaborative, where we've worked to identify common ground. And, you heard me say this quite a bit in the last few meetings, like, can you live with it? And I think it's the notion that we're here to solve for a thing, not just admire that it's a difficult thing. And I think being able to think through together, where is that common ground? How do we respectfully listen? How do we build those ideas together so that we at the end have a work group perspective? So I think what was achieved in this report was the ability to reflect a balance of ideas. And sometimes it's, unanimous and consent or consensus, and other times it was nuanced and important to call out those things that were raised by individuals. So I think this process, if I had to summarize it in terms of getting to recommendation, was very much at the core about discussion, debate, and learning. And I think that really reflected people bringing their whole selves, your minds, your ideas, your histories, but also your openness to debate, learn, and achieve something together in that common ground space. So let me share briefly this screen, and this is just a very high level recap of 4 core recommendations that are detailed in the report. Some of these you've already heard as we've been talking through this, but the equity is foundational. Having an alternative methodology approach that is taking into account the cost of care, not just the price of care. Having a single rate structure that specifies base rates, that is building on and addressing inequities, but also including and building some recognition of family-friended, neighbor and home-based and center-based care in that structure, and then continuously evaluating. I mean, I think this is something that goes part and parcel with an alternative methodology, is that if we're moving to having something that works around the cost of care, then we have to continuously be looking at that rate methodology. But in addition, as you heard Virginia say earlier, there is work to be done with regard to quality and equity, and thinking that we've arrived at this moment is not going to be, that would I think not be accurate, but to say that we can recognize and achieve and continue to work on would be what's acknowledged here. So what I'd like to do now with this broad framing in mind is turn it over to workgroup members to walk us through the highlights of what each of these areas mean. We've identified 7 areas of recommendations, and then followed by, and I saw this earlier in the chat with Lily, like what's going to happen next? When are these things going to get done? And so we'll close with, what is it that we see forward from, the giving of this report and what happens next. So I'd like to open with equity, since that is so foundational to this work, and invite Leah and Donna to maybe share your highlights that you see from the report around the equity focus.
Okay, thank you, Janelle, and I'll hop in first, Donna, I think, and then turn it over to you. I also just want to really quickly just express my gratitude for this process, and I think, as Jackie was saying, kind of it's been challenging, it's been tough. I think it's really important that this has been a public process, that it included, debates and different ideas, that we really challenged ourselves and each other and the process as well. And I think that we were really challenged and called to account by members of the public. And so I think, importantly, from my perspective, this report reflects acknowledgments by this work group that are necessary for us to realize an effective and equitable early career education system. And among those, I think in this report, you'll see that we very clearly acknowledge that we're operating in a failed market, that ECE can't succeed without relying on public funding, that we have no obligation to tie new or reform policies to unjust or inequitable ones just because those policies or programs are already there, and that early educators whose labor make up ECE and make ECE possible has been grossly taken advantage of. And so, we really seek to change that and to correct that, and really lay that out in these recommendations. Are the recommendations perfect? I will just say no, they're not perfect. Are we still limited in scope to programs and people that are touched only by public funding and not the entirety of the system at this time? Yes. And are there places where in our work group, we also missed the mark and perhaps didn't see our own biases, even within the diversity of experiences and perspectives of this group? And I would say undoubtedly so, and there's much more to do beyond today and beyond this report, but really making this report a living set of recommendations, building on the sustained level of participation in this process, the community participation, I think, also really signals just how much movement and power is afoot in our communities. And as we've heard, really, again, central to this is equity. So we had to come up with a shared definition and understanding of equity and what that means for this group and our process and in our recommendations. And so we were really fortunate to have Carlise King from Child Trends come and talk with us, give us a presentation, and we've adopted a definition that Carlise has been working with that actually comes from the Racial Equities Tool site. And so we have defined equity as both an outcome and a process. And I think this is very important because we can come to this with very different meanings, and we do talk about kind of equitable outcomes, but we have to have an equitable process in order to actually see those outcomes. And we're also very clear that equity is not the same as equality. Equality is much more about sameness. And we're not talking about sameness. We're talking about strategies, recommendations, processes that really ensure those who are furthest from opportunity, who have been most severely under-resourced, and who have been harmed and most have been harmed by our existing system and policies are really addressed, prioritized, included, and that we design our recommendations to ensure that that happens. So I think that has been very important in this process because it has given us a way to anchor our process and our recommendations. And we've defined this in the report for children and families, as well as for members of the workforce, for early educators, and for programs. And again, really talking about a process which includes members of the workforce, which includes program owners, operators, which includes families who are bringing their own experiences and perspectives of their children and their needs and desires, and helping to set the outcomes, right? So it's not just those of us on this work group, it's not just any individual department, but really making that part of our goals and really central to how we've laid this out. So I don't know, Donna, if you want to, I can't see on my screen, but say something more specifically about.
Well, I think Leah did an excellent job covering the ground here. I just also want to say how, as someone who's been involved in these conversations for at least 20 years, dating myself a bit, how much I've appreciated the candor in this conversation, and the work we do and the industry we work in and the communities we serve really sit at the intersection of race, gender, and economic injustice and inequality. And much of that framing was set long before any of us even breathed our first breath. But the fact that we've had these courageous conversations and really acknowledge the historic inequities that have been a part of our system, that continue to be part of our system, and call out the need to identify what is really needed to really respect and honor and compensate the work that is done by the women, largely women of color, who care for our children, and the children and families that are receiving the services is just critical. And I just really am proud of this work, proud of what we've put in here, and agree with Leah, it's not the end all be all. We have a long way to go. We all carry our own biases and are always doing the work to make this better. But I think the fact that we've been able to come together on some public understanding that can be part of the California public discourse is really critical. And I just will leave it at that.
Janelle,
oh, please.
I'm sorry, really quickly. I think, Donna, one of the things that you just said is really important, I think, to uplift and is, I think, central, and people will see that throughout the report, which is that we're not only talking about the historical kind of roots of today's system, but have really acknowledged that, you know, racism, misogyny, and injustices and harm exist now, right? They're active, we're living them, people are experiencing them, and so this isn't only about how we look kind of backwards, which is important, but how we also acknowledge that this is here, it's in our systems, it's in the systems we're working with daily, and it's in our public policies, our regulations, our funding structures, and not only a relic of something in the past, but something that is actively underway. And that was, I think, really central, a central acknowledgement of this group, and was necessary for us to make some of the strong recommendations I think we've made about beginning to undo many of those oppressions that we know exist today.
Thanks, Donna and Leah, for the comments. I think it's a really good foundational reference for us as we go through the rest of the recommendations, because they really emanate from a response to those concerns, and also wanting to materialize and make available a much different system based on that understanding. So let's start to move to what I think is a substantively, incredibly important as we talk about the how of this next, and that is recommendations around a single rate structure and alternative methodology. And so I'm going to ask Eric Sonnenfeld and Deborah if you could comment about what that means and how it appears in our work group's recommendations.
Thank you, Janelle. And thank you, other work group members, the public, CDE staff, legislative staff, and anyone who happens to be listening in today. It has been a journey, as many of us have mentioned. It's been a positive journey, I believe. I also want to recognize what Leah brought up. What we are recommending today is not perfect. However, we should not let the enemy of the good be the perfect. And historically, I've been around going through that 20-year thing. That has always been the death knell of moving rate reform forward, that the perfect has been the enemy of the good. And so hopefully today we're all going to do some good work together. We're all going to get into some good trouble together with our recommendations. And it's a starting point. It's not an ending point. Even though we are handing in our final paper today for the regulations, it's not over. And I want to make sure everybody understands that. So some background, you've heard a little bit from P5, thank you, about what options are available for a state to set rates for its subsidized world. But I want to delve a little bit into how we got here today. So as we all know, AB 8131 in January of 2022 created a single rate structure, combining the old regional market rate ceiling for our voucher-based programs and the old standard reimbursement rate that was utilized for our state contracted centers. So that was the first step to rate reform, combining. That's progress. And I want to recognize that is positive progress. But we can do more. So that's what we did here in California. But we also have the federal government, who also likes to get involved in what we do here in California because we utilize their funds. And they're a little bit nosy. And so with that nosiness, we have a couple of choices under the CCDF regulations. We can use a cost survey, or we can do a survey of the market, which is essentially what folks are charging. That's kind of what we currently have now under the RMR. Okay, and we all know how fun and exciting and all the flaws of the current RMR system. Won't belabor it much longer. Or you can do an alternative methodology. And that's what this work group has decided to do, and is championing a concrete step for the state to move forward with alternative methodology. And building a cost modeling methodology that truly is built upon the cost of care. Jeannie from P5 talked about the difference between cost and price, and how that is not working here in California, how it's broken. Significantly broken in California and other parts of the United States as well. In the report and in the appendices of the report, when you get to it, there was a report from the US Treasury that talked about the broken childcare market in the United States. It's an item that everyone needs who has children, that nobody can really afford quality care. And that's a problem. That's a societal problem. That's a policy problem. That's a future generation problem. So if we don't fix it now, who's going to fix it? We're standing on the shoulders of other folks, counting on us to move this forward. And the energy of this work group, the energy of the public, and the energy of everyone involved, hopefully is enough of a pressure that this becomes a policy item to move forward budgetarily for a true commitment in California. Because without that true commitment by our policymakers, we unfortunately are going to be in this hamster wheel once again. So, not to belabor it much more, but some concrete steps that were identified in the report. And you can read them at your leisure. It's really good reading. I encourage you to read it. And form your own opinions and let your elected folks know your opinion about what you think the work group has produced. All voices make everything better. So the work group, of course, is recommending we want an alternative methodology. We want to use the tools that P5 has developed to create that alternative methodology. We want that alternative methodology paperwork and steps to be communicated to the federal government so that we can pursue California changing to this alternative methodology, which is based upon cost. Additionally, some concrete steps would be change current statute and regulation to delink the subsidized market from the private pay market. As we all know, currently, providers who take subsidized children can only charge what the state subsidy or what the private pay folks charge is what the state subsidy will pay for. We need to delink that. That is a market failure on steroids. It's accelerating the problem. Okay. It also drives down the quote unquote price in certain neighborhoods and communities in our state artificially, drives it down in areas where there has been historical mistreatment over decades and to some degree centuries. So that's a concrete step that we believe needs to be taken care of now. I believe the report said immediately, and we all know what that means. Also, we need to recognize, as Lee had mentioned and Donna had touched on, what we are doing today is impacting the subsidized side of the house, subsidized market. But what we do in this report and whatever comes out of the legislature will also impact the private pay market. We need to be recognizing what we do today and our recommendations will impact them. And we have to prepare ourselves for any unintended consequences of that impact, because we do not want to make the situation worse. We want to make it better. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Deborah Corley. And thank you for listening to me today.
You're so kind, Eric. Thank you. And I too, I'm truly grateful for this opportunity. But I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. So the state has to increase the rates now and not wait for an alternative methodology. Here it is, 2022, and we're being reimbursed based on 2018 rates. And we do not have a permanent funding stream like New Mexico, or a guaranteed COLA like the TK through 12 programs in California. Providers are hurting now, and there's a need now to increase the rates. How much longer must we be expected to wait? Our voices have been strong in this work group, our opinions solid, and providers deserve to have a seat at the decision-making table for all future planning and discussions. If you want to know if something is going to work, bring it to the people who work in the front lines and let them share their expertise. The new rate system foundation has to be built on fairness, equity, and include everyone equally from all programs, along with our concerns. And unlike the old rate system, there's no room for bias against women of color. This has got to change. And I will end it at that, and thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks, Eric, for walking us through that. I think this is, again, a real part of the move forward here, right? Is that recognition of the broken market and how we proceed, and the balance or the need to both think about long-term, but also the present state and where that takes us. We probably dedicated, I'll say, more than part of 4 or 5 sessions really talking about base rate and how to wrestle through, as we talk about the cost of care, what really are the components of care. And I think underlining that, the recognition of what is to what may be in the future, and So I'd like to move us to base rate funding, and I know there's several components to this. So having Donna start with giving us a sense of what is the base, what does this mean in terms of how do we incorporate or think about the values, principles that we've unpacked, and then turn it to Robin to what is it important in terms of conditions or thoughts around what it means to establish a space requirement. And then Horace, we had talked last time or 2 times ago about centers and licensed family childcare homes. And then finally, Eric Sawell to talk about specific variables. So we've got 4 people lined up here. So Donna, why don't we go ahead and get started with you?
All right. And I agree with you, Janelle. I think this was the heart of our conversation. And I would be remiss if I didn't say it's been the heart of several conversations I've been involved in as it relates to paying our providers. We recognize that there is an existing level of quality and service being provided in our communities that is not yet being compensated appropriately. And the discussion around base rate and the idea of a base rate is we need to catch up to what we're already asking folks to do and compensate our childcare community and our providers at a respectable rate for the work they are already and have been providing for many, many years. And that had to be dealt with and taken care of first was an early agreement of this group, and that we need to identify that our current providers are already meeting enhanced standards that have been added on and on over the past decades, as well as meeting the unique needs of California's families. They provide linguistically aligned care, culturally aligned care. They provide care during non-traditional hours. They work diligently to make sure that the children's needs are met. They identify when children have challenges and might need additional support. And we aren't currently paying them for that work. So the idea of a base rate is to start there and get us to a right-sized floor before we add anything else on. So I'm going to pass this off to Robin, Robin and I've been talking about this for a long, long time. So I'm putting it in good hands to start the conversation as we get into the details of what a base rate entails and why it is so critical as a first step in the process.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to all my fellow work group members. I just want to say again, I guess I always like to look at the positive. I always like to look at the positive. And one thing I've appreciated with COVID is the fact that we have had the opportunity to come together like we've never had before. There are over 300 people from the public that are on this call, and I've met you work group members some of you only through Zoom. And so I think that's just been fantastic. I get to talk about what this theme here, establish base funding with no new requirements. I believe that this report captures our conversations over the last 8 months, that the base rate must be funded first before any new requirements are added for our already qualified workforce. The state of California cannot continue with the historical unfunded mandates. This is my 38th year. It might be my last. I participated on this committee to advocate for rate reform and rate increases for all our early education programs. We have a very unique and diverse mixed delivery system, and I believe we have accomplished this in our recommendations. You'll see throughout the report that we are recommending the cost of care for meeting current state requirements should be the basis of the reimbursement rate, including wage scales that set a living wage floor. And the work group recommends the single rate structure that specifies base rates. The state must increase reimbursement rates immediately, even before, and Deborah said this as well, even before an alternative methodology can be implemented, as providers are struggling to maintain programs with our current funding. Our early educators in the current system have been suffering long enough and are done subsidizing the programs by accepting poverty wages. This work group, I believe, believes that all programs should be reimbursed at a base rate that accounts for the cost of providing the quality services and meeting the current state requirements. We must establish and fund the base rate before proceeding with the supplemental rate levels or enhanced rates tied to quality or new requirements. Yesterday on Twitter, I don't know about you guys, but I am addicted. I don't really tweet, I just look at it. But yesterday on Twitter, Berkeley professor and former Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, tweeted, I found it to be perfect for our final work group meeting today. It read, folks, it's not a teacher shortage. It's a shortage of jobs that treat educators with the dignity and pay they deserve. I just really believe that for this moment, that was just a perfect quote. And I just want to thank you all for allowing me to share my passion the last 8 months, for your patience with me. Some of you, thank you for your patience with me. Some of you more than others had to really put up with a lot of side conversations, and I appreciate that. And I also want to thank you all again for your expertise, both with the work group and the public. And after 38 years, I am still hopeful. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. I think it's been, everyone's exercised both patience and learning. And so I think you have helped push everyone through this, and it's been something we've needed. So let's move to Horace. Do you mind talking about base rates for centers and licensed family childcare homes?
My honor. First off, I want to thank you, work group members. It's been an honor to be able to sit here and be humbled by the experience and the ability to share, and more importantly, to open ears and be able to come together for a great cause to come to the 21st century and know that this is change, and the change is going to happen now because we as a work group, we as the public, we as the people who are providing that love and cherish and passion for the early education workforce. But when you go and talk about the base rate for what it is currently and what we're recommending, it's so far. And to reiterate that we can't continue on the path that we're on now because providers and centers are closing. People are putting themselves in harm. Because of the pandemic, we've been able to meet and have some wonderful moments, but we also had some horrible moments because the pandemic has taken many members that were close to all of us. So it's really sentimental for me when I talk about that, because I lost a lot of friends and family. But in all reality is we were emphasized. Most of our providers and people in the early education were highlighted. So now we have a voice, and we want to make sure the voice is heard loud and clear. When we talk about what's included in the base rate, being able to understand the scale of being able to provide for your retirement, your sick leave, talk about self-help. Without you, there is no others. When we get on an airplane, they say, put on the air mask before you put on your child's air mask. Because if you can't do it, you're not going to be able to do it for your other children. And that goes the same sentiments as what we're trying to talk about right now. Let's have a self-help. So let's take care of ourselves. So including this base rate, we have to have adequate, appropriate funding. That's a highlight, because without the healthcare, retirement, the sick leave, vacation to get your mind right, this is a 24/7 job. It doesn't stop. We talk about untraditional hours. Let's realize what's the actual hours that we work. It's unbelievable when you sit down and you talk to providers or members in the early childhood education and the time that you give personally without giving back to yourself. So when it's going about talking about the idea of adequate, appropriate funding, that has to happen today, not yesterday. So this sentiment of why it needs to continue and move in that fashion, it has to happen as soon as possible. The ongoing professional development, including coaching, peer mentoring, early educators who participate. Let's be honest. You know, if we're going to continue this path, we want to be given quality back because that's our passion. We want to. We're not forced to. This opportunity to say, when we give love and cherish, we're going to be paid a handsome wage because it's right. It's built into the program. It's not something that we got to scrap and tease and wish for to uplift ourselves. But yet alone, we are providing care and knowledge and love to our early childhood providers and our community that we should be uplifted ourselves so we can give that back. And that's the quality that we're talking about. So those are the highlights. I like to emphasize that within the base rate, you got to be able to take care of yourselves. So health and retirement, these are recommendations. It has to be going. It has to be there. It has to happen soon. The ability to understand when we are providing the resources that we do on a daily basis, have time for us because we give our family time away. We got to be able to be paid for that planning time. So all this inclusive to be able to be part of a base rate, it's just mind-boggling. It's a beautiful thing. And I can't wait to see it. And Workgroup, the public, I'm just ecstatic that we're here now. And it's a living document that we're going to keep pushing and making sure it keeps moving. Thank you.
Horace, I think you've put a couple words in a sentence that don't normally go together: base rate and beautiful thing. So thanks for, making us see the not just the accomplishment, but the fact there's some beauty in all of that. So Eric Peterson, do you want to wrap this up by talking through a bit about the variables?
Hi, everybody.
Or actually, am I calling on the wrong Eric? I might have my.
Yeah,
I put you on the. I was going to say, wait a minute.
It's okay. I could have said something, but I'll pass it over to Eric.
Okay, sorry.
I'll mention some stuff about rates when I get to the exam part.
Yeah, I was just, I printed it small to save paper, so I'm reading going, that's an S. So Eric Sonnenfeld, back to you.
No worries. You know that this was purposely designed to have two Erics on the work group to have plausible deniability that either of us said whatever we said. So thank you for that introduction. I wanted to kind of tee off of what Horace had said. Part of what the work group's recommendations today is that the base rate is as inclusive as possible to try to account for some of those unaccountable things that Horace had mentioned, right? We can't put a value on love, but unfortunately in the world we live in, we kind of have to, right? And we all know that love does not pay the bills, right? However, we have to come up with a base rate that does. And so this base rate that is recommended in this report and the cost modeling tools that P5 has developed is designed to come up with a base rate by service delivery model. And why do we have multiple service delivery models in California? Because we want parents to have the access that best fits their needs of their family and their location, what's going on in their life, and the ages of their children. So the base rate is designed to cover not only FFNs, family friend neighbor folks, licensed family child care homes, licensed centers at Title 22 standards and Title 5 standards. And that base rate is designed to cover the actual cost plus time for preparatory, time for health, for staff, not just for the kiddos, for staff. Time for you to have administrative support in your business, because these are all businesses that need to operate appropriately. Not just in our world, but other agencies that have three-letter names like IRS and EDD and other control agencies that are very important that could impact our world if you don't do it right. Again, this may not be perfect, but it's good, folks. It's good. It's better than what we have now, significantly better. I hope the other work groups members agree with me. It is better. We had arguments. We're probably still going to have arguments, but we're getting into good trouble with each other and having good arguments to move this forward. And I encourage folks who've been in our process all along in the public comments about base rate, I encourage you to read the report to see what the base rate actually includes. I think it'll inform you to show that we tried to do good work here to make sure the base rate was inclusive as possible. We know it's not perfect. And I thank you for your engagement in that topic. I'll switch it back over to Janelle.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And for those that are looking at the report, it would start on page 27, so you can see those components, and it does span more than a page. So you'll see lots of things mentioned, and it really, I think, puts all these ideas that you've carried forward. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which, you know, as you're making those comments, Eric, about disagreements, but still being able to do this work together is making me think that this is a sign of, in some ways, respectful friendship. And I think this group has established that. It's just that ability to listen, but also sort of see disagreement, but also be able to continue to find each other in this space and work through those things. So Horace, wondering if you would mind talking about family, friend, and neighbor, which is something we surfaced 2 meetings ago. And this time it is Eric Peterson that will join you in making some comments about that as well.
My pleasure. When we talk about family, friends, and neighbors, they're definitely part of our huge, big structure. There are our grandparents that have the time and the love and the passion to say, you know what, my daughter feels comfortable with me, I'm going to provide that care. Or the neighbor who's right next door, who's has a little bit more time than the mom that's running around, or the best friend, or whatever the circumstances. You have members out there that provide for a lot of our children and doing the same structure, and they have the same kind of responsibility as us, in the sense of they still have to pay their lights, they still have to pay rent or their mortgage, they still have to go buy food, and they still have to provide that love for that child. So when we were talking about provide of our early educators, they're part of that process. So in order to have a base rate to allow compensation that's important for family, friends, and neighbors, to give them something more than what they're getting now, they're not even touching anything close to minimum wage. If you break down the numbers that they have now, it's anywhere $2 an hour. We have to do better. We have to understand that this is our responsibility to do better. And inclusive what we talked about with the work group and P5, and where we addressed small license, large license centers, we've addressed those. And I feel that we really address the family, friends, and neighbors too with this statement. Family, friends, and neighbors base rate should include compensation that is no less than hourly minimum wage and is moving towards a living wage. But further analysis is needed to establish rates for serving more than one child, for the number of children for which a family, friends, and neighbor provider can be compensated. But once the cost of the family, friend, and neighbor care is determined, the base rate should be based on cost of care. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a darn good start, because this is where it needs to be right now. A minimum wage with growth. But it takes all of us, to take the next step. I'd like to pass it on to Eric.
Thank you, Horace. Very well said. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I just wanted to point out a few things about friends and family neighbor care, because I know there's a large section of people listening in on this call right now, representing all kinds of child care, parents, providers, and just a few highlights of why friends and family and neighbor care is important is it continues to support cultural and linguistic choices that parents need to make and families need to make. It supports a mixed delivery system, which I really think everybody agrees will be really necessary as our child care system evolves, and hopefully sometime in the next year or two, we get some federal support. And we have to recognize that friends, family, and neighbor care is sometimes the only choice in childcare deserts that we have all over California. Sometimes parents don't have a choice of a center or family childcare home. They only have exempt care. Related to that is many of our families can only need more than 50 or 60% of the families at my agency use care evenings and weekends, and that's the only choice. So I think those things are all important to remember. Also, we have to support our state agency in trying to get us back into compliance with the feds around friends and family neighbor. We're out of compliance. Some of the things that will be involved in that are offering training, which we all want for quality. And so we have to be ready for that and be able to compensate our providers and agencies to make sure that we have the resources to train them adequately, and in their language and where they're at. So the other thing I would say is we need more resources to give our friends, families, and neighbor care child developmentally appropriate resources. At our agency, we give backpacks to our exempt providers when they come in and do an intake that has age appropriate curriculum and things for them to do. We need to be able to offer that kind of stuff to these providers, and also offer a pathway for exempt providers to become licensed if they seem like they want to do that. Since we have a child care shortage, this is one way we can try to bolster our capacity for licensed care. And this is not really my area, but I'm going to go back because I almost got a chance to say something about the base rate, and now I will. As many of us have been working on these groups going back to the 80s and 90s, I'll just say that it wasn't that long ago that our exempt childcare providers in some parts of the state were making $2.70 an hour. And that is exploitation. Honestly, there's no other way to say it. And for me, it's a tax on our poorest and most vulnerable families in the state of California. And so it's my call out to everybody, all the 300 people listening in here, that where this work has stopped multiple times in the last 20 years, as we come up with really good plans and good research, we bring it up and I'm just going to say it, the administration stops it. There's no other way to say it. And so I'm going to call all of you out to say it's your chance to contact your assembly members, your senators, and the governor's office and say, we have done this work. We've been doing it for 20 years. We have come up with the best information yet, because I'm very proud of the work this group has done. It's built on all the other groups, and I feel like we have offered an excellent solution, some excellent choices. There's a lot of work ahead, and to contact your legislators and say, hey, what's up? We've been doing this for a long time. Why are you not supporting the families of California that need this care? To become self-sufficient, honestly. And so that's my call out to all of you and all the members of the work group. Amazing job, and all the support staff and agencies that have been doing this really good work. And I do kind of feel like it's our final paper in college, and we're handing it off on Monday to a new group to take it forward. So anyway, thank you so much for letting me be involved in all the amazing work you've done. Also, I have one last plug for the Resource and Referral Network, the Love Connection. And I know it's been brought up here before, but it's a study that they did on why parents choose the care that they did. So I'm going to put it in the chat just as one more thing for you to do. I know everybody on the call now has like 50 pages of stuff to read, but it'll be good.
Well, thanks, Horace. Thanks, Eric. And I think resources are welcome. It's part of our learning and part of our understanding, and not overlooking what's been done already. So let's move to continuous evaluation and measurement. And I want to turn this back to Leah to make some comments about that.
Okay, so this work group has not only stated the importance of evaluation and measurement, but we've established this as a core principle. And by this, we mean measurement and evaluation of rate reform and its impact on equitable processes and outcomes. So again, thinking about what we mean by equity, and then how do we continue to make sure that that is what we're working towards in any policy reform. We do not mean in this context measuring and evaluating programs and people. So as a core principle, which you'll see in the report, we state it's critical to ensure that evaluation and measurement of rate reform implementation is equitable with early educators and families playing a key role. And in practice, I think there's a series of questions which we've been asking and have posed throughout this process, but a series of questions that can be used to assess process and outcomes. So we can be asking, are the recommendations as these move into policy and reform, are they centered on the perspective and voices of our diverse group of early educators, families, and children? And how do we know this? Where's the evidence for that? Who benefits and who is disadvantaged by any proposal, policy, or reform? As was raised earlier, this change will impact those outside of subsidy and contracted programs. So also understanding that there's some responsibility to also understand how folks are impacted by that, even if they're not participating in publicly funded programs at this time. Who is furthest from opportunity? Who and how are people being exploited when we think about the workforce, as well as when we think about families? Are these things being erased? Is this working? Whatever, the policies, the recommendations, proposals, reforms, new rates, is this working and making a positive change for those that we see right now, for example, who are among the lowest paid when we think about the workforce? We know our workforce as a whole is underpaid. And within that, we know that there are also gaps, and there are racial wage gaps, for example, in which we see that Black women who are doing this work are systematically paid less than their peers for equal work. So is that being addressed? Is that are those gaps being removed? And if that's not working, then the system's really not working well, and it's not ultimately working well for anyone. And then continuously asking and answering in public spaces, not behind closed doors or in independent departments, but in public spaces also asking and answering what is the role and responsibility of the state of California and its agencies in building and funding an equitable system. And then how does that kind of go back and drive outcomes and continued changes along the way?
Great, thank you, Leah, for those comments. I think we have two more areas. So one is accessibility and alignment. And Kim, last time we met, you elevated really some very specific things about rural and tribal alignment and offered some specific language. So want to appreciate that and turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing.
Thank you, Janelle. Did you want me to go over both accessibility and alignment at the same time?
If you could do the full range, it will be appreciated.
Okay, well, before I get started, I just want to thank everybody in this group for the opportunity to be able to have conversations, real conversations. I personally like the opportunity for debate. I think that it brings up important conversations, and we shouldn't avoid that. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of California today, the importance and preservation of tribal communities, the preservation of traditional Indigenous ways of life, and their self-determination and sovereignty. I'd also like to recognize their painful history, which our state of California was built upon, and that we need to address this in how our policies, systems, and structures are created. And through this work, we can commit to building a much better and mutual, respectful, and relationships that are created with dignity, and tribes and Indigenous communities can voice and be a part of that voice and also to work tirelessly towards justice and healing. Thank you for that opportunity. I'm pulling up my notes here. I also just want to mention that this has been a really great opportunity for me. I've been working in early care and education since the late 80s. And in my role, I've served in many different roles as nanny, assistant teacher, owner and director of a Title 22 center, director of a tribal child care program that had tribal CCDF, early Head Start child care partnerships, and CCTR, infant, toddlers, preschool, school age. And now my role is as executive director of the Tribal Child Care Association of California. I say that only because I didn't stay in the role of teaching, which is my true love, because I couldn't afford to. I had to be able to move on in order to be able to have a career that could support myself and my family. And that's unfortunate because my real heart work is in teaching. That being said, with this accessibility, I think it's really important for us to consider that not everything looks the same in our state for accessibility, that what is available, and as parents have choices in certain areas, like a more urban area, that when you get to a rural isolated area with childcare deserts, that becomes even more challenging, in that there isn't always licensed care, there's not always centers, and that makes things very challenging for families that are in the workforce. So looking at the unintended consequences of rate reform is that families don't always receive subsidy, and some that do, they still don't have access to high quality care. And then those that don't quite meet the cutoff for subsidies can't always afford or access quality care themselves. So there still needs to be a continued evaluation and identifying ways to remove new administrative barriers. And sorry, guys, I have a voice disorder, and it's really, it's been a problem today. So I'm going to get through this as best as I can. And that for these families, the early educators, we look at the reforms and that those are implemented, and looking at specifically rural and isolated communities that are very impacted by children's unmet needs, and also looking at the poverty in those communities and how important it is that there may not be those same types of programs, and the FFN needs to be elevated and is looking at the only option in some areas, as well as that Latino and Native American communities are more likely to live in those particular childcare deserts. I also want to talk about alignment and how important it is for us to look at how, as we make those recommendations, that there needs to be alignment across systems, that we can't continue to work in siloed systems. And it's particularly important when we look at the rate and quality reform. We can look at Head Start, early Head Start, as well as tribal child care and working with tribes. And when we look at the Head Start programs, it's really important to look at how all of the monitoring and reporting and quality components that are required, that this is something that can be looked at as a way for us to be able to have reciprocity. And that the work group recommends that the Head Start Collaboration Office, or the Collaborative Office, and the representatives of Head Start grantees, including Tribal Head Start and CSPP contractors and others, are brought together to identify this and create an alignment document. When we look at the tribal programs, there are over 34 tribal CCDF programs in the state of California. California has the most federally recognized tribes in the nation. And of those 34 tribal CCDF programs, they represent over 80 tribal nations. As we look at ways for there to be alignment, with that being said, it's really important to look at how important it is to include tribal voices, and that the Rate and Quality Stake Group recommends that alignment be developed in collaboration with tribal childcare, and also looking for ways for there to be ongoing successful collaboration between the state and tribes and understanding of tribal sovereignty. That needs to go from the top down and the bottom up, because it's really important that that dialogue includes discussions to reach shared goals and provide accessibility, affordability, and quality early learning and care services for tribes. Thank you so much for all of your time and for this opportunity.
Thanks, Kim. You packed a lot in a short amount of time there, so thanks for covering all of that. Our last area, before we get into kind of what happens next and some of the open issues, is related to systems. And we had a number of things. In fact, I think this is one of our first conversations about, moving from attendance to enrollment, and also the other conditions that we need to see addressed to fully support changes in reform rates, as well as looking at quality. So I'd like to invite Verlinda to talk to us about some of these broad system changes, and then have Leah add in things, additions about educator outcomes, and then Lily and Deborah to talk about child outcomes and accessibility. So Verlinda.
Hello, everyone. Bear with me because this is not my strong point here. We recommend that enrollment versus attendance, because right now attendance is making our field unstable. Guessing on what we're going to get and what to receive, we can apply for other things to make our business quality. We also recommend that our fees be paid in advance, so we can buy the materials and the supplies that needs for our service. We also recommend, COVID is here to stay, from what CDC is saying, and all the steps and procedures that we have to do as FCCs and everything. We need a plan in place, and we also need fundings and things like that for our providers, because we done lost a lot, like Chorus and everyone said, we lost a lot of providers. We didn't have plans in place, and then it keeps changing. This virus keeps changing on a day-to-day basis, and for the providers in the field, need that support, need that confidence, need that communication system on how to handle our young, because they're the ones who are being the last to be vaccinated or the last to get the health services that they need. And since we are involved with them, we need a COVID plan and a protection plan for the providers who needs to sanitize and disinfect their facilities and buy the supplies and things that they have. We wasn't thought about in the very beginning. We didn't have the marketplaces to go to. We didn't have the food supplies. So since this is still going, and before another pandemic really shuts us down, these need to be put in place on the grocery stores we can go to, the supply we can buy, to the educational components is required for the children to keep learning and our business to stay open. We also wanted to implement and recommend emergency funding for providers in them who may have an emergency situation like a medical leave, death in family. As you see, we're having a lot of fires right now, and our providers in them are being displaced and losing income. So we want to make sure that the state and everyone put something in place where that they can relocate, reopen. It does not take a 3 months to a 6 month process, and that they can continue to get those families who they were supplying services to, be able to come back to them so they can have that steady income. I thank you at this time for allowing me to talk and speak, and I turn it over back to the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Verlinda. I think that, let's see, I have a slight amendment here. So asking Leah to speak about educator outcomes within system, and then just Lily, Deborah, we're going to save you for the very end here, talk about child outcomes and accessibility. So Leah.
Okay. I think as reflected in Berlinda's comments, part of what was important to us on this work group in the recommendations is that we were being explicit about really the whole ecosystem in which providers and members of the workforce operate, in which children and families participate. So our recommendations, we have very specific recommendations, above in our report related to compensation, benefits and the costs associated with those things, and then these other really important parts of the system as well that impact outcomes. And so with regard to educator outcomes, I'm going to try and hit some highlights. This is section 3C, I believe, of the report, and there's 14 items, so I'm going to go through all of them, but hit some highlights here. We were very clear in this process that early educators are the linchpin of our early care and education system, and that caring for and teaching young children is emotionally, intellectually, and physically stimulating and challenging work. And that educators cannot offer the loving, compassionate, nurturing care that children and families deserve and need if their own well-being is not supported. So again, in addition to ensuring appropriate compensation, we also talked about working conditions and ways to minimize administrative burdens on people. We made a recommendation that there be guidelines established that promote supportive working conditions for early educators. So ensuring that we articulate things like appropriate teaching supports and the types of resources and tools available to educators in programs, whether they're working in centers or homes. Having things like paid planning time, paid time for professional development, and ensuring that there are also costs associated with people being able to adequately partake in those activities and have those other supports and resources and time that they need. The importance and goal around substitutes, which, again, has been one of those things that people have talked about for decades and is always a challenge. But again, how important that is for people to be able to engage in other types of professional activities and in professional development. Making sure that substitutes are available, allowing people to take paid time off, right? Sometimes we talk about, whether people have paid time or they don't have paid time, but there's actually a whole other question about, do people actually have the ability to take time even if they have it, right? Are there staffing levels such that you feel like you can take sick leave or a day off or whatever reason people need to take time off? So making sure that those aspects and elements are part of what we're talking about in our system and in our recommendations as well. We made recommendations around ensuring that there's access to training and professional development and support that focuses on cultural competency. Having topics around inclusion with children with disabilities, reduction of suspension and expulsion, support for multilingual and dual language learners, language affirmation. Again, having those tools and resources not just available, but then creating the conditions that actually allow educators to participate in education and training that is made available to them. And we have a list of some other additional topics that came through here as very strong priorities. Developing equitable and inclusive policies to recruit racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse early educators into the early care and education system, so that we're supporting our existing workforce and also thinking about the diversity of our future and incoming workforce. Increasing access to degree programs and training for early educators who want to or pursuing, may already be pursuing higher education, ensuring that there's targeted resources and supports things like, cohort models, offering coursework in other languages, being flexible on when and where programs meet, in addition to providing financial resources. Again, I think really the emphasis here on creating the conditions that allow people to be successful in their daily practice and in their engagement in education, training, and professional development. I think, Janelle, that's probably hits the highlights for now.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. That was excellent. And why don't we move to Lily to talk about now child outcomes and accessibility.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lily Marquez. I'm a parent and represent Parent Voice in San Francisco. I'm humbled and grateful to be a part of this quality rate group, along with other professionals, childcare providers that are so critical to this work, stakeholders and parents who are experts in their children's lives. So I'll be talking about things as it relates to the recommendations, accessibility and child outcomes. As we all know, it is essential that accessibility is made available to all, especially all children, those with special needs, to have the same opportunity for them all to thrive. This includes to meet the needs of a child's development and the family's needs, for example, making sure that they have the hours of care that they need, even if it's not traditional 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever the case may be. The report mentions that accessibility is multidimensional and must be considered from a range of perspective and experiences. So families should be able to find programs that meets their needs, their child's development, regardless of who they are and where they are. Leah mentions kids with special needs, something that I hugely advocate for, and others who have mental, social, physical, and academic needs. We all know that with this pandemic, there was a lot of damage done. So we want to be able to repair some of that damage that has been done. So the Rate and Quality Stakeholder Group is making the recommendations. 1, increasing affordability by removing the family fee requirements for all families below 75% of the state median income. And this is going to make a big difference, for example, to a family with an infant and a 4-year-old, making $3,100 a month, but having to pay $200, approximately $200 a week, and $384 a week in family fees. So having them avoid $1,100 a month, even with a voucher, will make a big difference in the family's financial situation. We all know the cost of care can truly be burdensome in many families, and making sacrifices and the inaccessibility of what should be free childcare. Most of us who didn't know how have learned that family fee comes out of a legacy of racism. Families of colors who are paid low wages and can least afford to pay back fees into the system. It assumes that childcare providers who are paid low can take reduction in pay, when families cannot, and providers shouldn't be underpaid either. While many providers love the work they do, they still need to get paid their worth, given the hard work of caring and teaching for little ones. The rates should increase to meet this need, especially now that we are living in high cost due to inflation. And the second one is the pay of cost of care. As the rates are low, the co-payments of family increase limits the ability to afford the providers that meets their needs. The co-payments are charged when the provider rates are higher than the subsidy rates. And as many on this call can agree, that this is difficult because families can't afford to pay more and providers can't afford to be paid less. So affordability is essential to be able to work, stay in the labor force for many families, encourage healthy development of young children, support families at the stage of their lives, which leads to family self-sufficiency, while keeping children safe and healthy within a good quality learning environment. We owe it to our children to advocate for them and help them grow academically, behavioral, emotionally, physically, mentally, and socially. Now, the child and family outcomes focuses on the concept of whole family, which has been mentioned a lot, and it really is a beautiful concept. It encourages a strong foundation, especially to a child that has so much potential and is always observing and listening, even though we think they're not. A family being supported regardless of their race, ethnicity, age, income, language, and culture, or other factors, will be in a better position to support their children. A family knows their children best, and they should be working with professionals to make sure that they're given or offered these services, which will allow them to assist and enhance a child's academic, behavioral, emotional, social, and physical well-being. So in addition to supporting the child and family outcomes through reimbursement rate reform and improving quality, which is what will help define outcomes for children and families in the future, this includes providing a loving, nurturing, culturally and linguistic responsive and accepting environment. This will promote and enhance social and emotional development, advocate for flexibility and extended hours for families that work non-traditional day hours. Make sure that there's a continuity of care so that child can develop relationships and their care is not interrupted. Services shouldn't be delayed. Family navigators should identify and address needs of the families. There should be a strong cultural and trust and compassion from professional and families. There should be appropriate outdoor spaces, no out of expense costs for meals and supplies. And there should be an updated database to aid families in need. Implement early and simple assessments to evaluate childcare for early intervention and implementation of services. If we have these processes and systems in place to assess, evaluate, track, and monitor, this will help children get the services that they need, grow, and thrive in a holistic manner. Thank you, Janelle.
Thanks, Lily. That is such a good way to wrap up a 100-page report. Your comments really ground us back to, I think, real purpose and importance of this. Before we turn this over to some closing remarks from our state agency leaders, I would like to ask Donna if you would mind. There's several things that we've kind of put out there and said, okay, this has to happen too, and this will happen after August. And so can you just remind us of what some of those things are? And then we'll turn it over for some closing comments from our state leaders and then open it up to public comments. So Donna.
Thank you all again, and thank you to all my fellow work group members. It's been an incredible process. We've made a lot of decisions and recommendations, and as Janelle said, there's still work to be done, a lot of work to be done, and those discussions all need to continue, particularly the discussions related to reimbursement rate reform. This work group, as it's currently constituted, ends on Monday, August 15th, when the report is submitted, though I know many of the folks on this group are going to be in the discussion going forward in a variety of different roles. We've talked a lot about the voices who contributed to this report and how it was centered in equity. We really strongly recommend to our state agency leadership and partners that they continue that focus and continue the inclusion of stakeholders in the work that needs to happen going forward. I think that many of us, would love to have another 6 months to try to unpack and have more of these conversations, and would be willing accomplices as you start to move forward in this process. The main recommendations would be that we define quality in the base and define quality as with a strong focus on what families and providers see as quality. I think that parents know where they want their children to be. Our job is to support their decisions and support the caregivers they select, regardless of type. And there is work that is needed, and CDSS and First Five are going to be doing an equity assessment of our current quality systems. These systems must be equitable and accessible to all providers for them to be effective and to really support the choices families make. We've talked about outcomes for early educators, but recognize that we have ongoing work in defining skills. It isn't so simple as counting college-based units. There are a lot of skills that are needed to be a high quality early educator. How do we measure all of those things and treat these folks with these very strong skills and history working in our industry equitably as rate setting continues? We also identified that rates are tailored to individual needs of children, but we know we can't do this all at once, and that we really need to implement targeted universalism to address the needs that are most critical at the beginning. We really look forward to working with CDSS on developing a deeper analysis of how we can do this and how we can make sure that those areas that P5 lifted up around infant toddler care and family child care are really addressed early on. And lastly, I think we all acknowledge that family, friend, and neighbor care is a part of our system. We had a very robust conversation about the need to really address it. I think Horace said today, we need to take some action immediately to make sure that we are compensating these folks at a minimum wage for their hourly work. And that can't wait. It can't wait for these other things to happen. And we feel really strongly that those providers need to be honored and respected in the rates that we're paying them. I'm committed to continue to work with CDSS and CDE and First Five California and any of you who want to be involved in these continued conversations. I think I've said a couple of times, this has been something I've worked on for years, decades, and I think that paying our workforce is foundational to having the kind of early care system that our state needs. And I just really thank you all for the work that you're doing. And I'm going to turn this back over to our state agency partners.
Thank you, Donna. So first, I'll just step in and note that we will now be opening up the chat feature to enable written public comment from now through the end of the meeting. So members of the public, please, you are welcome to provide that comment. And at the end of the meeting, we will also be taking some verbal comment. And now, indeed, we do want to turn things over to our state leaders. We have Deputy Superintendent Sarah Neville Morgan here and Department of Social Services Director Kim Johnson. So first to Sarah.
Thanks so much, and just appreciation for having us here today. I think our whole team is so encouraged to have heard so much passion and commitment for supporting children, families, and educators and providers from the many different voices of this work group throughout the course of our time together. Your insight is valued and heard. I want to take a moment to recognize all involved for the collaborative work that has led to this report, a report that really reflects the culmination of so many of the great minds of early childhood education and care in California and across the nation, as you brought in a diverse group of experts as well. The words and recommendations of this group will continue to resonate and inform future work and will impact our children, our families, and our incredible workforce for years to come. For CDE, the biggest strength of this report is how robustly and resolutely it proclaims that equity matters, and how it acknowledges that in order to achieve equity, we must recognize both the needs of children and families and the incredible diversity of the workforce and programs that work with them every single day. Further, while the report acknowledges there is more work to be done to get to the specifics around quality and the dollar amounts for rates, we're really glad to see that this report recognizes that equity means both accessibility and quality, because both are necessary, and you have to make sure that it's access to quality. Equity is an essential component of quality, namely, true quality for all children cannot exist without it. We've learned that measuring quality requires us all to place equity at the forefront of our decisions about how we define it, how we measure it, who's engaged in it, the metrics for quality that are used, all of this because of the impact they have on the educators, the programs, and the children. How we define quality and how we use information about it also has a direct impact on the experiences and trajectories of our children. During the early years, cognitive, language, social, and emotional development are intertwined. They can't be taken apart. They really are put together into that whole child growth and learning and development in their brains. They don't have a silo brain for this and one for the other. They really are intertwined. The early experiences that nurture these facets of children's development are able to strengthen their overall brain architecture, to really set that foundation that they need to excel as they move forward into school and that other formal parts of education, and then off into their college and career readiness. This report emphasizes and coincides with research that shows us the best way to ensure these experiences is by focusing first and foremost on responsive interactions between children and the adults that care and teach them. These positive and affirming interactions are fostered by nurturing and responsive educators and caregivers that have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to design learning activities that build the brains and support the development of diverse children. And as this report highlights, the well-being of the adults who care and teach our youngest children, including the wages, their benefits, and their working conditions, matter, both in and of itself as part of the dignity and respect for all of them, but it's also inextricably linked to their ability to form and sustain the nurturing relationships with children that lay the foundation for all learning. So yet, as our phase 1 in this ends, and we look forward to phase 2 of this rate and quality work group and what it can offer, it is CB's hope that we can move forward recommendations that build from the master plan for early learning and care and upon the foundation of equity for the workforce, and tackle the difficult questions around how to ensure true equity of access to quality learning and care experiences. Research shows that an early and strong foundation for learning matters. Although we must challenge the white dominant research on early education quality done historically, we also have a great deal more recent research that utilizes an intentionally diverse lens to rely on as we work to elevate the strategies and practices that best meet the needs and align with the values of our children and families, especially our Black, Brown, American Indian, our children with disabilities, and our children who are most at promise. It is these children who research has shown benefit the most from high quality learning opportunities later in life. We can, should, and must start with that elements of high quality early education programs that research and professional standards have identified. Together with all of you, we have an opportunity to critically examine each of those elements, redefine them through an equity lens, and develop a system that ensures these building blocks have the foundation of every early learning and care opportunity, so that families have authentic, real choices, and so that children reap the benefits across an educational system built to support their needs, affirm their identity, their sense of belonging, and bolster their lifelong success. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate everything that has been done in this space and call out all of the support, the partnership with DSS, and all of the West Ed support to make this happen.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. And I now want to turn to Department of Social Services Director Kim Johnson.
Thank you. Good morning. And thank you, Sarah. And thank you for the partnership of the Department of Ed and all our sister departments. Glad to be with you this morning. I been in and out as much of these meetings as I possibly can. As Lupe referenced earlier, I was one of those people that kind of kept you all in my ear as I could throughout my days to hear the phenomenal work that you've taken on. So first and foremost, tremendous gratitude to all of you for being part of this effort. The work group members, thank you for saying yes to engaging in this and for bringing yourselves, your knowledge, your expertise, and also who you represent front and center to all of these conversations to make it a comprehensive picture at how we're moving forward together. All members of the workforce, tremendous appreciation to you in every way that you are likely also trying to participate and engage at the same time supporting children and families. And so as always, I want to first and foremost also thank you to the consultant team, P5 Fiscal Strategies, Glenn Price Group, and West Ed. Thank you for being part of putting it together, compiling the wisdom of all who have participated in bringing it forward. And I do also, as Lupe did, have to give a special shout out to Nancy Stroll. I have been incredibly fortunate over the course of my career to have phenomenal mentors. Nancy is one of them, and has spent a career and lifetime on issues like this, really in support of making this system stronger and better. And I am tremendously grateful for your participation and engagement in this and bringing all that you've taught me and others along the way on how we move forward together. And then, of course, all of the public and community members. My job is to listen, to listen to you in community, to hear where you are identifying additional improvements need to be made and the how it needs to be made. And to Donna's earlier comments, you can count on the Department of Social Services to continue to engage with you community stakeholders in everything we do and how we go forward. We recognize the power and privilege of what program and policy setting and design is. And it is critical that that power is shared with community, that you are leading us in the solutions that work for you and work for children and families. And so you can count on our engagement with you along the way. So a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, when I was starting out in this field, part of my job was to actually explain to people what is the standard reimbursement rate, what is the regional market rate, why do we have these two things, how are they structured, what are we asking for in terms of changes over time, to legislators, to other policymakers. And here we are with the collective wisdom of experience of understanding how those things have worked over time and how they have not, and how getting to a single rate that identifies and addresses everything that you all have been discussing is the true opportunity. I want to also give Carla a very special shout out from Social Services. She obviously, in between your meetings with her and these meetings, is also, we are meeting, right, and talking about how we're moving forward together. And they're extremely exciting conversations to talk about the kind of opportunities we have in system change in this space. And again, want to appreciate all of your collective wisdom in moving us forward together. And I also just want to say, and I'm going to get back to the more work we have to do together, but please take a moment to recognize again, not only the work that you're doing here, but the tremendous, historic, and significant billion-dollar increases of investments in this system over the last few years. I want to obviously thank and appreciate the opportunity to work within the administration, and for this governor, Governor Newsom, who has also supported this investment, our legislature, and of course we still have champions in the Women's Caucus, and outside of that caucus in the space that this is a near and dear priority issue to. And of course, those billions of dollars couldn't have been possible with also the federal administration and the president supported this space. And it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to continue that kind of growth and investment, ways that we're supporting directly the workforce, ways that we're increasing access to subsidies to families, ways that we're creating new programs, new facilities, new infrastructure, making sure in the course of all that we're keeping our health and safety and our ways in which we're responding to the pandemic front and center, as well as we're still working through that recovery. So please do take a moment to recognize that you have been part of a historic, significant investment in this field. And it wouldn't have occurred without your support, and the ways in which you're involving and engaging with us now has to continue for us to be going further together, recognizing where we're starting from and the history, as you all have been discussing, to where we need to go. I myself have had the privilege of being supported by my first caregiver, which we called Grandma Dora. She was a family friend and neighbor caregiver, my very first, and I have nothing but fond memories of that support. I also attended a private preschool center. My own children have been in small family childcare, large family childcare, also centers, and even direct contracted programs through the Department of Ed. And now I have the opportunity of turning to my grandchildren that I have and what access they'll have. We have a tremendous strength in the diversity of our delivery system. To Sarah's points, we want to be able to ensure that every family in California has access to the supports that they need. And that's also doing both that. We are looking for parents earning and participating in their own economic mobility opportunities, but children learning and benefiting from that tremendous gift of the relationship between the workforce and the children, the provider, the professionals, the teachers, the directors. So I am grateful to have had these opportunities for myself, for my children, and for my grands, and that we are working together to make sure this system is as strong as it can be. We absolutely have more work to do together. We have to do it together. And it's plans such as this one that's building on all of the greatness of former efforts, right? We know we don't want any of these things to be on shelves, that we are utilizing the best of the best, which we have best and brightest minds in the state. So I'm looking forward to using this and implementing and operationalizing with you, and of course, the additional work that we have to do together. So thank you. I'm tremendously grateful, and we will absolutely be calling on you as we have our work set out ahead of us and going forward together. So thank you all so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Director Johnson, for those really inspiring words. And Janelle, I'll turn it back to you for any other final thoughts before we turn to public comment.
Yeah, I think, one of the things here is in some ways we're done and just begun. And I think, a lot of your comments have mentioned what a major step forward and this is to have what we have now. And I think still, though, recognizing work ahead. And I think, I'd like to turn this over just for a few minutes. We do want to be able to leave time for verbal public comment, but I know a few members here want to express some of the hopes and desires for the future and wonder if, Lily, Deborah, and Nancy, you'd like to make a few comments in the next few minutes, and then we'll open it up for public comment. So Lily.
Yeah, Janelle. So this report has been a challenge to meet the needs of all parents, as we know, families, childcare providers, stakeholders, but it has been a tremendous opportunity to create change and help improve and enhance this work. And although we can't add, what everybody's wish list would be, it's nice to have a compromise of what could be added and what most of us can agree with. As a parent and from a parent perspective, I hope that this report truly is a guide to help change and better shape the early education and childcare system, which is in need of improvement, given that our kids and children in today's society, what they're going through. Many have issues, as we mentioned, emotionally, socially, mentally, physically, not to mention the effects of the pandemic and the learning loss of our children. It's essential that we make sure that everyone who needs resources have what they need to thrive. So I have 4 desires from this report, which is 1, focus on the children's safety, health, education, happiness, and growth. 2nd, create a culture of quality improvement, making this a live document. 3rd, support the early care and education workforce and the services that are truly needed. 4th, use observations and assessment to support a child's needs across all development domains early on and be proactive to finding feasible solutions and focus on the child's development. And 5th, continue to invite parents, stakeholders, and build partnerships and relationships to support the quality and elevate this essential work. So I'm truly grateful to have had a voice in this space and help improve this work along with other group members, stakeholders, and other individuals who can agree that the returns and investment in early education is important, and it's been definitely overdue. This journey is a path to increase equity, access, diversity, inclusion, quality, improve processes and procedures while encouraging our children to thrive and focus on them, which is why many of us are involved in this field. Everyone in this process has been amazing and has made big contributions. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lily. Deborah.
Thank you so much. I want to take this time to thank Governor Newsom for signing AB 378, giving family child care providers the right to unionize. I would like to also thank all of CCPU's team for believing in home-based educators, AKA family child care providers, lifting up our voices and standing united with providers and bringing to the forefront our concerns and issues with policy and regulations, and creating a place where family child care providers can come be heard, and listened to. I would like to thank the entire work group for being open-minded and supportive to each other's ideals. You know, that's the background because I'm working. But being open to others, all of our ideals, our feelings, and our suggestions. And thank you to all of the administrative teams and participants from CDE, DSS, West Ed, P5, Miss Nancy. I can't name them all, but I would like to thank everyone. Thank you for all your hard work, your valued insight, endless hours of dedication for the project in hand. And I want to remind everyone here on this panel, those who are listening and watching the webinar, that if it hadn't have been for CCPU, Family Child Care Providers, AB 131, and the rate restructure JLMC, this work group would have never happened. And this rate restructure that is unfair, inequitable, shameful, and a failure would have continued, and the state would have never publicly addressed it, corrected it, or brought it to light. And to the providers of this state, because we know our value, our worth, our strength, we have made changes for our industry, and it doesn't stop at rate restructure. If providers want to continue to make an impact on this industry, you have to get involved, build our union. We have to be strong, united, and work with our allies, our daycare families, and our friends. We have to all call out our legislatures who are willing to speak up against the inequities that are embedded in childcare and who are willing to write policy and regulation to correct this wrong. I hope all family child care providers are inspired, moved to join CCPU, and to be a part of a powerful movement that does not take no lightly. Family daycare providers, get ready to speak up, make phone calls, attend rallies, knock on doors of every legislature from Sacramento to your local area and demand a meeting so that we are heard, seen, and taken seriously for the work we do. And always remember, no one in Sacramento will move if you don't speak up and demand change. And to my fellow family child care providers on this panel, Verlinda, Horace, and Lucy, thank you for being courageous, inspiring, supportive, and representing and being the voice of family child care providers in California. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. What a perfect ending with that call to action and appreciation for, of course, this work continues. And of course, it wouldn't be a work group meeting without ending on public voice and public comment. So we're now going to shift to verbal public comment until 11:30. We'll ask that members of the public who would like to speak to use the virtual raise hand feature. Please do that immediately so we have a sense of the queue. And again, we'll take as many as we can until 11:30. Please only use a maximum of 1 minute to make your comments and make them brief. Please state your full name and any organizational affiliation you may have that's relevant. And with that, we will start with Jessica Magdaleno. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, my name is Bernice Miles. I know you called someone else, but you unmuted. You gave me the right to unmute myself first before her. So,
please go ahead.
I'm just gonna take the time to, yes, thank everyone that has been involved on making a change, hearing us all. I know there's a lot more to do. There's still some work that has to be done to have a fair change, not just a change, a fair change for us. I want to thank Lupe and whoever's under her, and obviously the governor for helping us all and making the change. Like I've seen changes in the CDSS myself because that was one of my complaints before. The last family they came aboard, there was a big change, good for good. So I appreciate it. I appreciate everything that is done behind doors. I appreciate everything that is behind all the hard work that you guys do. I know it's 1 minute, but we don't have enough time to say everything we need to say. I'm just looking forward to do more and more for this fair change that we're asking to.
Thank you
Not
so
a
much.
change that will benefit some, but all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I do see a hand. Justine Flores, please go ahead.
On behalf of all family and child care providers, licensed and unlicensed, I would like to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to us, for hearing us, for understanding us. Donna, I have seen you at state levels and federal levels. I've seen a lot of you at state and federal levels. I would like to thank you for that, for always advocating for us, for putting out your time, dedication, and energy into the commitment that we need to achieve better for our field. The ECE field is a valuable field, one that has been underseen for many years, but thanks to these committees and thanks to all the JLMCs that have been created, this will be the change. This will be the first steps that we need to implementing the changes. There's some revisions that I would like to see on this. However, at this point in time, I believe that we're moving in the right direction. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Justine. Final hand up from anyone who's attending. Okay, seeing none and appreciating that there's been lots of comment in the chat. Again, I just want to thank you all for this process. I do see we have one more hand, Oscar Tang, and so since we do have a minute, Oscar will take you as our last speaker. Please go ahead. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you so much. And just trying one more time to unmute Jessica. I believe there may be a Zoom update problem. Okay, well, hope you are putting your comments in the chat. Again, thank you all so much for this incredible process and what a tremendous ending to the process with today's meeting. We look forward to seeing you in the future, and to Deborah's point, continue the rallying cry. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.